we can speak to Colm Murphy, who's a lecturer in British politics at Queen Mary University of London and the deputy director of the Mile End Institute. Colm, thank you for joining Paris Direct. Tommy Robinson on Friday on X, he wrote that Keir Starmer's regime are the enemy of the British people, descend on London. How high are tensions in London today?
They're very high because, as your reporting pointed out, there's actually three major events happening which are stretching police forces. There's this far-right march organised by radical right, far-right and fascist agitators. There's the counter-march organised by Stand Up to Racism, which is very much trying to have a physical show of force against the far right. And you have the FA Cup final, one of the biggest football games in the entire year. So tensions are high because the protests reveal physically the stark cultural war polarization that we see in British politics, as we see elsewhere, but also because everybody's sort of nervously watching to see if the authorities can keep it under control.
Yeah, and for our international viewers, how do you explain Tommy Robinson's popularity in the UK? And is Keir Starmer or the British government partly responsible for his rise?
Couple of things to say about Stephen Yaxley Lennon, which is Tommy Robinson's real name. Firstly, he is actually very unpopular across the broader population. Hope Not Hate, an organization, did some polling recently and showed 17% of the country like him, which implies 83% do not. So he's not, I wouldn't say he's popular. What he is, however, is popular among small groups of people who are particularly radicalized, and demographically, that's particularly in like men aged between 25 and 34. So I think it's very important to stress he isn't popular. It's just he's been able to reach out to some groups in society, partly because of our fragmented social media, where we can live in kind of bubbles of information. And in some bubbles, Tommy Robinson's very divisive and often racist language has gained significant ground.
Yeah, so maybe not popular, but able to mobilize a small but distinct portion of the population. And then we look at the security precautions that are being taken today. Some civil liberty groups might raise questions about the use of live facial recognition. Does that pose a problem for you?
I don't really have a particular expertise in policing, so I won't answer that question. Sorry.
No, it's fine. I mean, when we're looking at Keir Starmer, who says we're fighting for the soul of our country, this comes at a tricky time because the prime minister also embattled and fighting for his own political survival as well.
Yeah, hugely. So the interesting thing here is the synchronicity of these protests with a crisis in high politics. What's happened over the last week is Keir Starmer, who was already fatally wounded because of recent dreadful elections for the governing Labour Party, has now faced a significant challenge from within his own party. So Wes Streeting, a major cabinet minister, has resigned. And now there's this process where a by-election has been triggered in the northwest of England by an MP standing down, so that a man called Andy Burnham, Mayor of Greater Manchester and a Labour Party politician, can stand. And the idea there is many people within the Labour Party would prefer Burnham rather than Keir Starmer as Prime Minister. It's a very high-stakes strategy because the Labour Party have to win that by-election, and Reform, which is the sort of radical right party in party politics, performed well in that area. But yes, so this process is kind of happening by coincidence simultaneously with deep instability in British politics at the political level.
And depending on how this Saturday goes in London, will that alleviate or add more pressure to Starmer?
I don't think it will actually make that much of a difference unless the protests really do spiral out of control and the police aren't able to control it. And then I think that would increase pressure further on Starmer. But no, I think the Starmer's career is probably coming to an end one way or another very soon, regardless of what happens today, because he's already alienated so many within his party. So no, I don't think it will make that much of a difference because Keir Starmer is already in so much trouble.
And some of the political headwinds we're seeing today in the United Kingdom, they're happening elsewhere in the West, political polarization. and a sort of vacuum created in the middle, or at least perhaps the most vocal voices are very much polarized. What's the cure to this, to rebuilding a center for the people who don't identify with either the far right or the far left?
It's a very tricky question to answer, which makes it a very good one. Andy Burnham, the man challenging Starmer, I think thinks he can be somebody who can cross these cultural divides. It's notable he's going to run in a constituency which has a lot of reform support, but also he did very well in when he ran for mayor of Greater Manchester. It's the same part of England. So I think he thinks a different kind of style of politics, more locally rooted, might help. It's worth noting, too, that most voters are not attracted to the kind of rallies you'll see today, as I explained earlier. So there are political issues like the cost of living, which if you were able to shift the agenda onto, rather than onto more divisive culture war issues, particularly immigration, then perhaps you could rebuild a coalition across these divides. But the thing about British politics is there are quite clear blocks at the moment, left blocks and right blocks of parties, and there's only so much switching between them. So if you're a politician, you do need to have a very clear sense of what voters are likely to consider you and what voters are not. And certainly the people marching today in the Yaxley Lennon Tommy Robinson march are never going to vote for the Labour Party.
Colm, thank you very much for your time. Dr. Colm Murphy joining us from